Hey guys, welcome back to the Deep Beauty Podcast. Today's episode, you guys, is going to be a really juicy one. So you guys want to listen the whole way through. So I have Dr. Sarah Ballantyne back on the podcast, and she has a PhD in medical biophysics, which means she knows a lot. And she is the creator of Nutrivore.com, which is a fabulous resource for those of you that are getting into really kind of figuring out the nutrients and the main nutrients that you want to get from your food. It is a fantastic resource. I had I had a chance to go through the whole thing, and when I say the whole thing, not even the tip of the iceberg. It is an unbelievable resource. And you guys might remember I had Dr. Sarah Ballantyne on the podcast before because she also created the book that was my Bible when I was first losing my hair, called The Paleo Approach. And it just kind of broke down AIP and everything. So we're going to get into this podcast episode and break everything down for you guys. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. And thank you so much for having me back, like a little mini reunion. I love it.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. I've seen all the things that you've been doing with Nutrivore, and I really want to kind of get into the nitty gritty on all of that and how that can help the listeners. And first of all, why don't we touch on what led you to create Nutrivore?
I think it was the confluence of a few different things. So I've been a creator in the wellness community for over 12 years now. And over that time, I have witnessed sort of firsthand the rise in popularity of ever more restrictive dietary plans, right? So the fad diets that tend to gain traction are the ones that cut out more and more foods. And I've been shouting about nutrient density from the rooftops since late 2011. And knowing how important nutrients are for our overall health, seeing people being attracted to these really restrictive diet plans because of the propaganda, right? The marketing, the promises. And instead of seeing results, right, they're digging themselves into even deeper holes because they are increasing how many nutrient shortfalls they have in their diets. Because if you cut out all food sources of important nutrients, there's no other like possible consequence, then health problems are eventually going to arise, even if it's not a nutrient that causes a disease of deficiency like scurvy. We know that not getting enough nutrients increases the risk for all chronic health problems and infectious disease, like everything that could possibly go wrong. So feeling like watching a car crash in slow motion, kind of having this like front row seat to this really big shift from being very pro whatever our dietary framework, promotes,
Mhm.
to spreading fear so that everything is designed to terrify you of food toxins and have you, reading labels obsessively, cutting out more and more foods, and sort of see this rise of food fear mongering on the internet and promoting these like super restrictive diet plans. While I'm researching about nutrients, it became really imperative to create the resource to help combat where this community it was heading, or at least a part of the community was starting to head. And at the same time, talking about nutrient density, I found myself needing more tools. So in the olden days, when I would say nutrient dense food, I would give this like hand wavy list of like organ meat and seafood
Mhm.
and vegetables. But that's based on looking at a long list of nutrients on a like nutrient fact sheet. Um, I needed a way to be able to say definitively, no, beef liver and kale have about the same nutrients per calorie, and I needed a way to calculate that. So as I was working to expand my own diet and start to really take a step backwards from dietary dogma, and really to take a step backwards from this like even more um, enthusiastic like foods to avoid lists that dietary frameworks are embracing. As I was personally working on adding foods back to my diet and focusing on nutrients and understanding, my big entry to this research wise was understanding their impact on the gut microbiome. I realized that it was time to just like, this is my thing. This is what I have to give to the community, is a nutritional sciences education for the average person and a way of quantifying nutrient density. Not that that's the only tool that we need to be able to understand what a healthy, nutritious diet is, but that it's really important, right? When we say nutrient dense foods, we need a metric that's not, I feel this food is nutrient dense. And unfortunately, in diet culture right now, too many recommendations are based on what somebody feels is true and not what the science actually shows. So the Nutrivore score is the calculation, it is the math that shows us what foods are nutrient dense. And then that is accompanied with the broader education that you can find on Nutrivore.com, what nutrients do in the body, what foods are good sources, and then also identifying those foods that are unique sources of nutrients so that we can start building a framework, like a checklist, like those things that, as long as you're not allergic, are all the foods that really help us get all the nutrients that our bodies need from the foods we eat as efficiently as possible, so that you also have as much dietary flexibility as possible.
Well, I think that one of the things that kind of could get lost in the message, especially when I was reading your book, was that you really pushed, like, not just cutting out certain food groups to reduce inflammation, but you really talked a lot about focusing on the foods that you should be eating to boost your nutrients. And I think that's one of the things that can get lost in translation, is that people kind of jump on, well, okay, no, I have to not have this anymore, and kind of miss out on that whole part. So I love that you're focusing on that with Nutrivore. And I was taking a look at your website, and I noticed that you have like all sorts of resources. And one of the most, I think, easiest, like, I think for as a, because not all of us have PhDs, and it's not that you love to talk about the science. You don't write in a super complex way. It's very easy to understand. But one of the things I really loved was the matrix that you created.
Yeah.
So if you could talk a little bit about what's available on Nutrivore.com.
So the Nutrivore Weekly Serving Matrix is the formula for basically what to focus on to get all of the nutrients we need as efficiently as possible. So it is based on these really big scientific studies that look at different food groups and then like divide them into all the different types of vegetables, right? Like cruciferous vegetables and leafy vegetables and root vegetables and mushrooms and onion family, and then measure how much benefit we get for how many servings per day or per week. So what this is it's a very simple checklist. So it's like not a tracker. It's not a food journal or food diary. It takes me all of 20 to 30 seconds to fill mine out after each meal. It's just check boxes. And you just check like, yep, I got my serving of mushrooms for the week. I got my serving of berries for the week. I ate a serving of seafood. And what it does is it helps to focus our attention on the most nutritionally indispensable foods. So the families of foods like cruciferous vegetables that have something we can't get from any other food. Cruciferous vegetables have a really important class of phytonutrients called glucosinolates that are incredibly cancer preventive. So they can lower our risk of cancer, but they also lower the risk of cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. They extend lifespan. So you don't need to know what it is in each one of these foods that rises it to that level of what I call Nutrivore foundational foods. There's 12 food families that kind of hit that status of, look, this has something really important nutritionally to offer us that either we cannot get from any other food, or that is really challenging to get from other foods, right? There's a handful of other sources here or there, but you can't really put the pattern other than, right, mushrooms as a source of ergothioneine. We can get some from like chicken liver and tempeh and kidney beans, but like all mushrooms are great sources. And then there's these random handfuls of other foods that might have this amazing amino acid that is associated with reduced risk of all of the chronic conditions associated with aging. So super important for healthy aging. So which is something I, funnily enough, all of a sudden care about a lot. I've just hit that part of life where I'm like, ooh. So what the Nutrivore Weekly Serving Matrix does is it gives you this easy checklist. It's not, you don't track everything you eat, you just track the most important things nutritionally. It helps you track dietary diversity. And it's a great way to just put all of the Nutrivore sort of nutritional sciences education into practice without having to think or especially overthink food choices.
I love that. That's so amazing. So talking about food choices, what would you suggest as like your top 3 to 5 Nutrivore like rated, like scored foods would help with hair loss?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I would say a really top food would be something like oysters. So if you look at nutrients that are associated with hair loss, I mean, hair loss can have a lot of different root causes, right?
Right.
But like
Yeah.
overall, the patterns associated with hair loss, omega-3 fats, especially EPA and DHA that are found in seafood are on that list. Zinc is on that list, and oysters are the top food source of zinc. Iron is on that list. And so oysters are a pretty good source of iron. Biotin is on that list. Oysters are really high in like all of the B vitamins. They also have vitamin A and vitamin D, which are also on the list of nutrients that are associated with hair problems, sort of more broadly. So I would say oysters would be like a really oysters and like the whole mollusk family, oysters, mussels, clams, they all are pretty similar
Love oysters.
so I would say that would be a big one. Another one, because polyphenols in general are, I mean, they have many, many health benefits, but one of those benefits is hair health. Polyphenols in general are fantastic. That kind of puts like all fruits and vegetables on this list kind of like automatically. Legumes can actually have a really good amount of polyphenols as well, but it also puts something like tea, like green and black tea,
Okay.
is a
Interesting.
very dense source of polyphenols. So that's two. Okay, let's pick. I'm gonna say tea. That was number two. Number two is tea. If we think of like really amazing sources of biotin and B vitamins, I'm going to say the food that everyone is afraid I'm going to say, which is liver.
Oh
But
gosh.
sorry.
I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get there.
You are allowed to hide it from yourself, and it doesn't need to be a ton, right? Like the great thing about liver is, a serving a week, which could be a quarter serving 4 days, right? Or however you want to get it. If that means you want to take like an encapsulated liver pills, or you want to
Okay.
mix it with your ground beef, like that's my favorite, is to I grate it frozen. And then I mix it with ground beef, and then I put the ground beef back in the freezer. So when I take ground beef out of the freezer, it's 20% liver. And you
Oh,
can dilute it
interesting.
more than that if you want. You can make it
Wow.
10% liver, right? And then just every time I make something with ground beef, if it's Taco Tuesday or if it's burgers on the grill, it has a tiny bit of liver in it. And when you can cater this to your own taste. I find it 20%. I can't taste it. It's just adding like a little bit of umami at that level. Like it's almost a
Okay.
flavor enhancer, which is
Interesting.
if you had told me as a kid that one day I would think of liver as a flavor enhancer, I would have told you were crazy, because as a kid, we were forced to eat it. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table for like 3 hours and not being allowed to leave until I finished my liver. So like
Oh my
I have some
gosh.
trauma. I have some trauma around liver. But liver is the most nutrients per serving food we can possibly choose. So it's
Right.
incredibly high nutrient density, which means nutrients per calorie, but also really high nutrients per serving, which means it doesn't take a lot. And it has, again, it's a really phenomenal source of iron. It's a phenomenal source of biotin. It is the top food source of biotin. It's a really great source of all the B vitamins, B12, vitamin A, it's got a little bit of vitamin D. It's hitting a lot of those nutrients that are super important for overall health, for immune health, and for hair health. So yeah,
So
so it's
that's number 3.
that's number
Liver is number
three. Got to
3.
keep two more. I didn't get the credit for the mussels and clams there, I guess. So
You
I
could do one
think
more. One more
one
thing.
more. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go. Let's go. A really great food source of vitamin C. Vitamin C also very important. And I'm going to say citrus, right? I mean, it's classic that citrus is a really high source of vitamin C. The reason why it's so good, it doesn't have the most vitamin C, right? Something like bell peppers has a lot more vitamin C,
Okay.
but the polyphenols, which we already talked about being really great for hair
Mm-hmm.
health, the polyphenols and vitamin C increase its bioavailability. Depending on what studies you look at, it's like anywhere between increasing it by 30% and like 5 times.
Wow.
So it dramatically increases how much vitamin C we absorb. And when you look at the relationship between vitamin C and stress, and of course, stress is
Oh, huge one.
potential a potential contributor to hair
Yeah.
loss, especially in terms of like how it impacts like things like testosterone metabolism, right? So like stress is a really important manipulation point that's outside of diet, but getting enough vitamin C regulates the stress response. So vitamin C is important for the production of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, and
Mm-hmm.
for catecholamines like adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol. So we need vitamin C to be able to make all of those hormones that are part of the stress response, as well as like mental health more broadly. But
Mm-hmm.
then vitamin C also impacts adrenergic receptor sensitivity. So when you have enough vitamin C, your body responds to stress appropriately. When you don't have
Nice.
enough vitamin C, you tend to feel more stressed. You tend to have higher cortisol levels. You tend to have higher systolic blood pressure, which can be used as a proxy to measure stress. You feel more stressed. And there's a bunch of studies showing that supplementing with vitamin C helps to regulate the stress response. So they'll do things like take people and make them do public speaking,
Mm-hmm.
or make them do mental arithmetic, which apparently like 97% of people have like a stress response to being told like, quick, what's 4 plus 17? So they'll do this to these poor people in the studies, and they'll either give them a placebo or like a vitamin C supplement for 2 weeks before. And the ones who get the vitamin C are like way more calm through that process. And then
Wow. That's
their
so
like markers
interesting.
of stress are lower. And then both vitamin C as like the key mechanism here, but also citrus fruit are associated with lower risk of depression and anxiety.
Oh my gosh.
So
So
some
like
major manipulation there.
is that like eating an orange a day will, keep the stress away type thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Oh
in fact,
wow.
so I think, please, I don't keep all of these facts in my head at all times. So I think it was the Nurses Health Study, but I'm not, it might have been a different one of these large cohort studies.
Mhm.
And if I remember correctly, they were comparing 2 servings of citrus per day,
Mhm.
whole fruit or juice, to 2 servings per week. I believe that was the comparison. And if I remember correctly, numbers tend to stick in my head. So I believe it was an 18% reduced risk of depression in 2
Wow.
servings per day versus 2 servings per week. I can
Wow.
fact check myself and send you the correct information if I am wrong about any of that. But it's regardless, I can tell you, I am 100% confident it's a pretty large, meaningful difference. So yeah, oranges, grapefruit, lemons, limes, kumquats are in season right now. So yeah, any citrus, whatever you like, hugely beneficial. So I'm gonna, yeah,
Wow.
that's my list. That's my list.
Super interesting. No, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Okay, so now I want to. I know that we're kind of going in more of the direction of Nutrivore with your career and
Mhm.
everything like that, and what you want to contribute to the world. But I do want to touch on AIP a little bit, just because that's
Sure.
how I found you, and that's what really, really helped me a lot with my hair loss. So I just want to touch on briefly how AIP can help with autoimmune related hair loss.
Yeah, something like alopecia.
Yeah.
So the autoimmune protocol has 5 pillars.
Mhm.
Um, nutrient density, elimination and challenge, which is about identifying our own individual autoimmune trigger foods, and then stress management, getting enough sleep, and living an active lifestyle while avoiding overtraining. And I think it's a incredibly powerful approach because it does incorporate an equal focus on all 5 of these pillars.
Mhm.
So the nutrient density piece is Nutrivore, right? So
Yeah.
that is where my interest in nutrients came from. That is what has evolved into Nutrivore. And the Nutrivore score can be used as a tool to identify the most nutrient dense foods at all phases of the autoimmune
Mhm.
protocol. And it can also
Love
help to
that.
inform priorities for reintroduction,
Mhm.
because that diet expansion and reintroduction is really important for living in the world, but also for
Right.
lifelong health, because a more diverse diet is also very beneficial. It's associated with reduced risk of everything bad that could happen. So, so the nutrient density piece is flooding the body with nutrients that the immune system needs to regulate. It is providing the nutrients that our gut microbiomes need to be healthy, which interact with our hormone systems and our immune systems. It's providing the nutrients that whatever tissues are being attacked need to heal, right? It's going to focus on all of the nutrients we just talked about in all of, right? All of the foods we just talked about are all foods that are heavily embraced at all phases of the autoimmune protocol as well. So that nutrient density piece is about really making sure to address nutrient deficiencies. And that would include doing something like getting your vitamin D levels tested and supplementing if they're low, right? So not all nutrient deficiencies can be corrected with diet, which is why it's important to also work with a healthcare provider, no matter what we're doing, right? So, so that's that first pillar. I'm going to come back to elimination and challenge. So then sleep, stress management, and activity are all important for immune function. They're important for neurotransmitter regulation. They're important for hormone regulation more broadly. They're important for all aspects of gut health and digestion. They're fundamental to our health. And so I think what happens with a lot of people following the AIP is we get overly focused on elimination. We forget about challenge, we forget about nutrient density, we forget about the lifestyle. And so it's really important to recognize that this is a very robust diet and lifestyle intervention.
Right.
So working on those lifestyle factors is really, really key. And it actually changes how our bodies can respond to food. And so working on those can actually dramatically increase the success of reintroductions. So the elimination and challenge, I think, is often misunderstood as here's a huge list of foods that are bad for everyone with autoimmune disease. That's not it. It's a list of foods that are more likely to be individual trigger foods for you based on what we know from the scientific evidence. So they're more likely to be foods that may stimulate your immune system, that might cause an immune intolerance type reaction. So by cutting them out for even 2 to 4 weeks, it doesn't need to be a really long time in the full elimination phase, and then methodically testing our own tolerance, adding them back in. An elimination challenge protocol like that is the gold standard for identifying allergies and intolerances. And so you monitor yourself for symptoms for about 4 days, you test the next food. And that process is also really important for the AIP because it's about identifying your individual trigger foods, right? The foods that are driving your immune system to be overactive. And your trigger foods may be different from mine. And we don't know what foods are the problem until we go through that process. It can be scary, I understand. But it can also be incredibly empowering. Even when the answer is no, that food doesn't work for me. Even when we discover that that's the answer by having a really big reaction to it and feeling absolutely terrible, that is incredibly valuable information to walk through life with. So, so that is why the AIP sort of incorporates. That's why I would say elimination and challenge is that pillar, right? It is that entire process. It's not about the foods you cut out. It's about understanding which foods are a problem as you add them back in.
So one of the biggest questions that I probably get from my viewers is, because AIP can be really restrictive, what are options that vegetarians can use to follow this diet?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't typically recommend diet combining. So the autoimmune protocol, because it cuts out a lot of foods that people are familiar with, right? It embraces diversity and eat the rainbow and tries to incorporate a wide variety of very nutrient dense whole foods. But sometimes those foods are foods that people are not very familiar with. And so one of the sort of common pitfalls of the AIP is kind of getting into a too restrictive version of it. And that is more likely when you are applying a second dietary philosophy to the AIP. So AIP plus Candida, AIP plus vegetarian. And so I feel like that is a good situation where it's time to kind of take a step back from the restrictions. Like I realize there's many different reasons why someone might follow a vegetarian diet.
Hmm.
Um, so I think in that case, right, your lifestyle pillars are all going to be the same. Your nutrient density pillar is going to be the same. On a vegetarian diet, it's going to be a little bit harder to get certain nutrients, right?
Hmm.
B12, omega 3s, magnesium is going to be a bit harder. Potassium is going to be a bit harder. Folate, potentially, unless you're eating a lot of legumes, then you're probably going to be fine. Preformed vitamin A is going to be hard. So depending on your genetics and how well you convert carotenoids into vitamin A, that may or may not be an issue. So there's certain nutrients that are going to be harder to get on a vegetarian diet. So really, that's where like really understanding what nutrients do and what foods contain them and where are those exception foods, right? Like
Hmm.
getting vitamin B12 from tempeh or natto, right? Fermented soy, or getting a supplement that is isolated B12 from vegetarian sources, right? So like understanding what are the nutrients that are going to be harder to get and where am I going to be able to get them
Right.
becomes really important, especially when we're trying to make sure that the immune system has the nutrients it needs to function normally.
Hmm.
So one of the things we kind of skipped over before is the nutrient requirements of the immune system. So the immune system uses a huge collection of nutrients, like almost more than, I would say, the cardiovascular system is like the only one that's kind of like equally intimidatingly long in terms of like the nutrients that the system needs in order to function normally.
Hmm.
And what happens when we're short on any one or two or like a small handful of these nutrients is the most likely part of the immune system to fail is the part of the immune system that regulates itself, that turns itself off when the job is done. So this makes the nutrient density focus of the AIP or using Nutrivore as a tool even more important in the
Hmm.
context of diets that kind of have it's not that they have nutrient shortfalls built in, they just have nutrient shortfalls that are very common
Hmm.
because the way most people focus their food choices on those diets will result in nutrient shortfalls that can be potentially problematic. So for that reason, like any food, right? We talked about fermented soy. Soy is initially eliminated on the
Hmm.
autoimmune protocol, but it could be an incredibly valuable source of nutrients for a vegetarian who is looking to help their immune system stop freaking out on them. So that's why I would say, like, pull back on the eliminations, like, sit and figure out where all these nutrients are coming from first,
Hmm.
and then tackle the elimination and challenge piece. One of the things that can happen for a lot of people is they can have an incredibly huge amount of healing just by focusing on the lifestyle parts and the
Hmm.
nutrient density
Yeah.
part and kind of skip over the identifying trigger foods altogether because they're moot by the time your body has all of the nutrients it needs for the biological systems to work normally. So I would say take a step back from the eliminations. If you have foods you suspect are the challenge, like still eliminate and challenge those foods, right? Like if you think, oh man, I kind of have a feeling it's gluten, your feeling is probably right. Try it, cut it out for a couple weeks, try adding it back in, see if you have a magnified reaction. That is why elimination and challenges work, is because they tend to show you the reaction very clearly.
Oh, that's
So
so true. That's something that happened with me, with one of my autoimmune issues that I have, that gluten, and I added it back and the reaction started again. I took it out, stopped.
yeah.
It's just so crazy how that works.
So it's a really fascinating, like, the way it works is immune cells have different average lifespans.
Mhm.
And when you have a reaction to something, there's immune cells that are like driving the reaction, but there's also immune cells that are constraining it. So our immune system never just goes whole hog at anything.
Mhm.
Fighting off a cold, the immune system is always trying to keep itself in check. And obviously, an immune disease, it fails to keep itself in check in all of the ways that it's supposed to.
Mhm.
But even with a food reaction, immune system's trying to constrain itself. So it's letting the reaction go, but it's also saying like, yeah, but don't go too crazy. And then what happens when you cut out that stimulus, right? The
Mhm.
gluten that you're having an immune reaction to, the cells that constrain the reaction die off faster than the cells that drive the reaction. And that's why We don't want to be stuck in eliminations too long. You want to be
Mm-hmm.
doing reintroductions during that window of time where the cells that constrain the reaction have died off or are lower.
Mm-hmm.
They won't ever completely go away. And the cells that are reactive are still hanging around, because that magnified reaction, yes, it's no fun. You can be like, man, I eat gluten every day for my entire life, cut it out for 2 weeks, and now all of a
Yeah.
sudden I can't eat it. It's not that you gave yourself a gluten intolerance, it's that you unveiled it through
Mm-hmm.
this little trick that we played on our own immune systems. I mean, serves them right. They're tricking us all the time if we've got autoimmune disease.
I just, it's just like hacking your own health, right? This whole
Yeah.
thing is all about hacking your own health, and everybody's body is going to be different and everybody's reaction is going to be different. And we all kind of have to get to the bottom of what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And I really appreciate how much research you've done on all of this and how you've kind of made it simplified and brought all of this information to us. It's
Thank
truly
you.
so incredibly invaluable. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you again for having me.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. So we're gonna wrap up this podcast. Before we do, I just wanted to know if there's like one final tip that you would leave with anybody that is experiencing hair loss.
I would say we're going to get a little mushy. I would say let go of the need to blame anyone or anything.
Mhm.
So let go of the need to feel responsible because it was somehow your fault or somebody else's fault for not telling you something, or the universe's fault for not delivering you the right information at the right time. Um, I think blame doesn't serve healing, right?
Mhm.
It is stress. Guilt and blame and shame are all emotions that make healthy eating less sustainable. So they're all emotions that tend to drive restrict and binge cycles, disordered eating patterns, disordered relationships with food. And they also magnify the stress response, which also is never going to be helpful. And the fact of the matter is, not everything that's contributing to our chronic conditions or symptoms or whatever our health challenges are, not all of those things are in our control. Not
Mhm.
all of those things are things that we can change, even if we can identify what they are. So genetics are a factor. There's nothing you can do about that. Environmental exposures are a factor. There's nothing you can do about that. Social determinants of health are a factor. There's very little that you can do about that. You know, different studies estimate the role that diet and lifestyle play in the overall health equation at sort of anywhere between like 40 and 60%, which means there's
Wow.
anywhere between 40 and 60% of stuff that you can't change, you have no control over. And I think the challenge when we are looking to make diet and lifestyle changes to improve our health is we want 100%. We
Mhm.
want the effort we put in to deliver every single result that we've ever wanted. And it can make it feel like, well, what's the point? If I can only get 40% from these changes that I'm making, what's the point of even doing them? The point is 40% is amazing.
Yeah.
40% can have a life-changing impact on your health and your health as you age, your lifespan. It's not a small amount to be improving health. But I think it sort of helps to, if we're not kind of looking for like, what's the culprit? Am I the culprit? Is it my fault for making these bad choices in the past, even though I had no idea that this food that I was eating was actually triggering my immune system, or this food that I wasn't eating was really healthy and I'd be healthier if I added that food back in. I think it's always important to keep in mind that we are all doing the best we can with what we have, with the situation we're dealt, and with what we know at the time. So I think it's really important to just keep in mind that there's no one to blame. Blame does not need to be laid at anyone's feet. It's just an unfortunate event. Sometimes chance is also part of this. Sometimes it's just a roll of the dice. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it to make diet and lifestyle changes and work on those healthy habits to get that 40 to 60% that we can get.
I love that. So just be kinder to ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. I really appreciate the time that you took to be on this podcast. And I'm going to put all of the information on where you can find her in the show notes for this podcast episode. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put it in the description box. So thank you so much. So have a fantastic day. And thank you for hanging out with us on Deep Beauty Podcast.
Thank you so much again.